Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we're piecing together the transformation of work one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's conversation is about the gap, the one between how leaders think their people are doing and how those people actually feel. According to new research from the Predictive Index, nearly half of the employees say their boss doesn't fully understand them. That's not a minor miscommunication, it's a gap between strategy and sentiment, between productivity systems and human energy. And in an age where AI is accelerating everything, that gap is getting harder to ignore. What breaks when we try to optimize performance without understanding behavior? How do you lead when people are burned out but pretending they're okay? And what happens when the way we manage people stops matching the way people want to be managed? Those aren't just human resource questions, they're leadership questions, and they're exactly what today's guest has spent his career exploring. Dr. Matt Poepsel sits at the intersection of science, strategy, and leadership, and his voice is helping shape a more human way forward in this AI powered era. He's a behavioral scientist, leadership expert, and VP of Talent Optimization at Predictive Index. He's also the author of Expand the Circle, Enlightened Leadership for Our New World of Work, and host of the Lead the People podcast. Matt, welcome to the Future of Less Work.
Thank you so much for having me, Nirit. I'm excited about this conversation.
I want to start with that data that you're surfacing. Nearly half of the employees feel misunderstood by their manager. That's a big number. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a couple things. I like to frame it up as a lack of training, tools, and time. That's what we see on the part of most managers. When it comes to the training, when you think about going through a business school program, I've been through many of them, and we always teach about strategy and operations and technology and all these great things, but we don't really emphasize the people part enough, considering that every business is really a people business. So I think a lot of managers are managing people very transactionally and very superficially. So that's just part of the core training.
Could that be? So, okay, I didn't want to go to AI this quickly, but I'm wondering whether people management is changing because of how, the tools are evolving.
Yeah, yeah. I think technology has always evolved the way work gets done. When you think way back, to
Yeah.
the Industrial Revolution, et cetera, all the way till now. What's different now is that the AI tools have a capability to rehumanize as opposed to dehumanize work, although they're not always being used that way. And I think that's a real area that we have to keep our eye on when it comes to the future.
Yeah. So, okay. So I knew I didn't want to go to AI this quick. So we'll backtrack for a second because I'm still thinking maybe people are changing because we keep putting it on the tools. I wonder if we came out of COVID realizing that life was short, that there were a lot of other things we wanted to do, and maybe we don't want to be all in or work or start our life where work ends, maybe is the way to say this.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point. And people are always changing. And certainly every new generation brings new values, new expectations, new desires to work. And so even before the pandemic, when we started to see millennials enter the workforce, we started to see more of a focus on corporate social responsibility, for example, and sustainability.
Yeah.
Gen Z only continued that. You're exactly right, Nirit. When it comes to post-pandemic workers, many of us had our values reprioritized, and we didn't just question how we wanted work to fit into our lives. We questioned why we work in the first place. And I think all of that's this very rich backdrop. And at the same time, in the face of economic headwinds and the adoption of AI and the shift to remote and hybrid work, it's really this rich, sort of challenging stew that we find ourselves in. And it's going to take a long time to sort it out.
So how come managers, because they're also evolving generations, right? How come managers aren't along on this ride? Because the gap's too big to
Yeah.
just assume it's never been there.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to this constant pressure to focus on productivity. I always say there's three systems at play at individual, at team, and organizational levels: performance, people, and purpose. Performance is all about productivity, getting the numbers right, the metrics, et cetera. People comes down to relationships, comes down to our employee experience. And then purpose is really that intentionality, that mission, that something bigger than ourselves, the hopes and dreams we might have for what work can do to improve the world and society, et cetera. And so we're starting to see this notion of earlier generations that are entering the workforce now wanting to climb that ladder, so to speak. But I think there's this constant pressure to hit that first rung of performance, and managers develop a lot of fear. They don't necessarily trust. They don't have the trust in themselves or even in their people that the numbers are going to be taken care of. So it's harder for them to matriculate to those higher levels and higher stages, I would say, of leadership.
Yeah, and so here we're back to the gap creates performance issues. I mean, there's got to be a misalignment. This misalignment has an effect on performance.
Oh, definitely. It's really hard when you don't feel you're appreciated, you're not understood, you don't feel valued. It's very difficult to do your best work. And I think that's what we really need is we need people to feel like they're in an environment where they can do their best work. And during the beginning of the pandemic, we saw the Great Resignation where people are like, I'm not going to put up with this, and I can just go wherever I want. And that's not the case anymore. The job market really tightened up. And so now what you see is a more likelihood that people are removing their discretionary effort. They're logging off at 5 o'clock, not 5:01, 5 o'clock, they're done, as opposed to really feeling like they're bringing everything they can to work, because when that perception gap, to your point, is there, they're saying, you don't get me, it's just a job. They're going to transactionalize in return with the transactional treatment that they're given.
So actually, you're saying something interesting because I was having this reaction. I don't think we should be thinking about productivity and successful management in terms of hours, right? So I don't think we want to say that if somebody logs up at 5, they're not necessarily doing the right work. And again, we haven't even brought AI into this. I think what you want them to do is really not come to work, but actually really engage in the work and care about it and drive it and then do it whenever it makes sense, right? So this engagement, I know where it's lacking. And we know managers are in the middle of this, right? And we've put processes in place, engagement surveys, manager ratings. Do you think those are still useful, capturing what
I think it's
matters?
always important to listen and to capture the data and to really think about it. I also think it's important to take action on it. If we do go to the trouble of collecting employee sentiment, we should be listening and we should be taking action. But I think for the first time recently with the engagement studies, we've seen manager engagement really take a hit. And typically you'll find that manager engagement is slightly higher than employees and that executives tends to be slightly higher than managers. So the more senior you get and the more your engagement tends to go up, all things being equal. And that's not necessarily happening right now. Middle managers in particular are feeling this squeeze of executive appetite for change, burnout of the employees that are beneath them. They may be squeezed at home if they're of an age where they have aging parents and young kids at home and they're trying to figure it out. And I want to hold people accountable, but I don't want to be a jerk. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so much. And I think it's really starting to show up in those engagement numbers. And you're exactly right, Nirit. It's not about logging off at 5:05 or 5:30 versus 5 o'clock. But if I start to withhold my some of these classic organizational citizenship behaviors, am I going to be collaborative with my colleagues or am I going to keep information to myself? Am I going to take the extra moment to demonstrate kindness at a time when somebody might need it? Or am I just like, hey, man, it's just a job. I'm out of here. It's a mindset more than it's the clock itself. Yes.
Yeah, and if the manager's thinking that way, no wonder the employees are disengaged, right? So I'm wondering if we kind of zoom out from the individual to the kind of the bigger system, maybe it's time we restructured work itself. Maybe that's why we have a misalignment between how the work is structured to how people want to work and live and focus and recover.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm very excited about that because in the very beginning, when you asked me the question, I talked about training, but I also talked about tools and time. And I think this is where if we restructure work, we make a more intelligent use of the advanced technologies we have now, we have tools at our disposal that we may not be using. And we can get back time, not to just do more transactional work, that would be devastatingly bad, in my opinion, but to actually do the relational bits and to help people find intention and meaning in their work. Those are things that are possible for us if we choose to use these new technologies in a powerful way.
Yeah, I love that. So I called this podcast The Future of Less Work, not because I think there is overall less work, but I think we should be doing less of what doesn't matter and more of what does. And you're actually saying, how do we reuse the tools, the new tools we have at our disposal, not just to, um, to do more of the same.
Yes,
And yet,
exactly right.
look at all these announcements. I mean, most leaders are saying, I'm implementing AI tools. Maybe you will or not have a job. Definitely what I'm looking for is, less headcount per unit of work, more productivity. And that seems to be the focus.
Oh, 100%. And I think every time we get these new technologies, Those of us that have some experience don't necessarily use them in new ways. And I'll give you a very simple example. My kids make fun of me incessantly because I use text like it's email. I write incomplete sentences. I use capitalization, punctuation. They're like, what are you doing? You're so old. Well, that's what's happening with AI now. So we're seeing that some of the more tenured generations, we'll call it, tend to use AI like a search engine. They ask it a question, they get a simple answer. But young people say, well, what's possible? How do we treat this as a brainstorm partner? This is an extension of my creativity, as an example. And so it's not to be ageist about this and say that older people versus like myself versus younger people can't use AI. But I think it just shows that when we have new capabilities, we have to be willing to reinvent how we use those things and not just simply, pave over the cart paths, so to speak.
Yeah, so I agree. A question I think is, does that translate into optimizing for something else other than productivity when you feed it into the organization and start changing the systems?
Yeah.
And I don't mean by that organizations don't need to drive more productivity, but I'm wondering if it's almost like a mathematical formula. Bring in tools, remove people, and get more work done.
Yeah, it depends. I think that in every case, it's going to come down to intentionality. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? In the case of more productivity for productivity's sake, that's not going to be a very humanistic recipe and one that's going to have the best and the brightest want to work for you in the long run. Current job market aside, and I think that that's an important point. Is that top talent always has a choice. And what we know about post-pandemic workers and early career workers is they want meaning and they want significance in their work. And the idea of writing themselves out of jobs because they're training AI to be better and better isn't all that appealing to them. And they may put up with it in the short term, but in the long run, that's just not going to work. But every business has to be a profitable business or its equivalent, or we'll be out of business. We get that. And some businesses, to be honest with you, we probably should remove labor from the system if that labor isn't very higher order rewarding. If it's not necessary, you're just not going to be competitive if you artificially prop up labor. So, I think when those things happen, now here's where intentionality comes in. Do we upgrade our workforce and help them to find new skills and to reskill and to take even more meaningful jobs and higher wages for things that they now do, versus just approaching it as a cost-cutting measure, a productivity measure only, and one with a little bit more tactical emphasis or focus only? That's a choice. And that's the intention that's going to show up in our employer brand, which helps our competitiveness long term, our ability to attract top talent, all these things.
Yeah, I love this example because I always feel that people think that there's a competition. So either you're a productivity first mindset or a people first mindset. And I'm thinking, well, you can bring in AI and people will actually work themselves out of jobs because they'll redesign AI into them if they understand what's in it for them. And it doesn't even mean that what's in it for them is that they'll stay employed with you, but if what's in it for them is that you're building their skill set to be able to then take it and do something else and they're, rebranding themselves, that's also okay.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite examples is out of San Francisco. There's a company called Tarani. They make syrups. If you ever go to Starbucks, you might
Oh,
see a shelf full of
absolutely.
Tarani. Over 100 years, manufacturing, not an easy business. 100 years, never had a layoff, never. And has there been some improvements in manufacturing in the last 100 years when it comes to machinery and robotics and AI and packaging? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely yes. But when every employee has a piece of profit sharing, a piece of employee ownership, a piece of these types of upside, then trust is there. So they've made a decision to be modern and competitive and high scale, and they've experienced tremendous growth. But they're an example of saying that's not the only thing we're about. And it's just, to me, a fabulous example that even in manufacturing, right? A lot of times we think about heavy industry. Even in that world, we can still take this integrated approach of performance, people, and purpose all at the same time. And in fact, be more competitive as a result. It's only fear that holds us back. And fear destroys everything good in relationships and organizations. Fear is what creates those gaps, that separation, which is why I say that leaders are healers of separation. We draw people in toward us. Cohesion is what's needed in a post-AI world, a post-pandemic world, as opposed to this distancing, this isolation that sometimes results from fear.
Okay, that's important. Let's stick with that for a second. So I get why people are afraid, especially now, right? I mean, everyone's telling them the tools are coming for your job, so they're afraid. Why are the managers afraid?
I think that managers are very much afraid because a lot of what they purport to do, a lot of what they understand is also at risk of going the way of AI. If it's the transactional administrative bits, we'll call it. If all of a sudden project management decisions and reporting and forecasting, things that managers used to do of sum up all these numbers and take the aggregate output to the executive team so they can know where we are on this part of our business. I don't need managers to do that anymore. I mean, AI does that super well and faster and more accurately than managers ever could. So all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, what's left for you is the coaching and the empathy and the development and the career growth. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do those things. Here comes the fear.
And do my managers care? Because before the I don't know, I wonder, my managers are used to valuing me on the reporting and the control side of the business, right? And you're now telling them, oh no, don't worry about that. Worry about talking to your people, bring them along, keeping them engaged and happy and satisfied. And I'm thinking, do my managers care?
Have you changed your incentive systems? Do we now change your performance ratings and an expectation that you're going to develop your people? Do we create rewards and promote people who are not just the ones who drive the metrics, but who also generate and develop future leaders? If the answer is no, then you're creating and instilling that fear because you're still using the old playbook to judge and rate and perform and do bonuses and raises and everything based on things that now, you're asking people to introduce productivity tools. So this is where you create this incongruence. And when that happens, managers, are very frustrated and concerned. I talk to so many who say, I know I need to be a coach to my people, but I don't have time. I'm on this hamster wheel. The business wants me to drive these numbers, these utilization outcomes, et cetera, because it hasn't changed.
Well, because it's measuring productivity. We just said that, right? They're bringing in AI. They want the managers to report that it's working as defined by more productivity for less employees.
Yeah, and when you take a transactional or a tactical approach to that, we miss an opportunity. And I think you're going to find this increasing distancing between the haves and the have-nots. And it's not the haves and have-nots when it comes to AI or even AI skills. It's going to be that intention. Are we building a workplace that's going to really unite performance and people and purpose? Because in the future, remember, every employee cycle is cyclical. And eventually, the seller's market, the buyer's market, who has the power? No, we need partnership. And when that happens, top talent is going to gravitate towards those companies that successfully demonstrate they can do all three. I can build a successful business, but one that cares for its people and provides opportunities to serve something meaningful and significant in my work, through my efforts. So you're going to see this splitting apart of the market, and the ones that are more focused on the nuts and bolts of productivity now with their AI approach are going to find themselves lagging the market when it comes to other companies that figure out how to have their cake and eat it too. How do we get the technical results, but also the human results? That's what I believe the ideal future of less work really looks like. It's that aligning intention with what's possible and holding fear at bay by collaborating and being cohesive and sticking together, taking our people with us, as opposed to creating fear through our approach because we're focused on these lower order outcomes only. The lower order outcomes always take care of themselves if we are correct when we're aligned and we put the effort into those higher order outcomes. That's how that works.
So let's take this down a notch. So a manager or leader is listening to you say this. Okay, what would you have them start with?
Yeah, start with self-awareness. Like, understand where your fears are coming from when it comes to the future of AI and your work. What aspects of the leadership role, not the management role, not the admin role, the leadership role really are you most comfortable with and least comfortable with? What can you do to practice those things? How are you demonstrating things like empathy and coaching and collaboration and these types of things? How well do you know your people? How much time do you spend talking about them as opposed to the work that they're doing? Like, are you holding those things in balance? Those are all things that before the day is over, whoever's listening can say, okay, those are 2 or 3 things that I can do right now.
So we all manage time, right? So how do you coach them to let go of the controls in the environment that demand, um, the focus on productivity and the other stuff that they're doing so they could free up time for the coaching and the seeing the people?
Yeah, it feels like a real leap of faith until you do the math on it. And you realize that when you start to learn how to delegate and you start to empower your people, you end up with less fires sort of in your lap and you can be more strategic. I talk to managers, they tell me 2 things. One is I want to be strategic. I want to think long term. I want to think big picture. I'd like to read something. Could I have time to just read something? And then they say, I don't have time. I don't have time. And a lot of it comes to the fact that we're not necessarily using the tools to give us back time, and we're not fixing our own psychology of why we're afraid to let certain things go. If I was a really good salesman, or I'm a sales professional, I'm super good, so I get promoted. Well, don't be surprised if my comfort zone is rolling up my sleeves and working on at the deal level with my sales reps, as opposed to being a true sales leader. Now all of a sudden I'm thinking about capabilities and relationships, et cetera, and employee confidence, et cetera. If those things are foreign to me, if I'm not super comfortable with them, it's going to be that much harder. But that's something that's being accountable, holding myself accountable in this leadership role. So I feel like when we use AI tools to get back some time, don't immediately apply that time back into the same old thing. That's not forward progress. But use some of that time and use the tools to actually accelerate some things like team discovery. Go to AI right now, anyone you want, and say, give me 3 insightful questions I can ask my team to learn more about each of them in my next team meeting.
So
Go
you're
ahead.
basically telling managers use the tools as coaches or
100%.
self-coaching.
If they don't know off the top of their head, and I don't blame them for not knowing, because again, we don't train them, but everyone has access to some level of an AI tool that will give you 3 decent answers to that question. And then the question is, are you willing to do it? And if not, that's where the psychology get in. If you heard me say that and you don't follow through on that, what's going on? What's the blockage that you're experiencing that's saying, oh, they wouldn't go for it. I wouldn't know how to run that meeting, like whatever it is. You can coach yourself through that or get some help or talk to a mentor or a peer. But the reality is that we can't say we don't have the time, because you can use a simple technique, Nirit, that I give, which is called the first 5 minutes. Can we use the first 5 minutes of a team meeting or even a one-on-one to get the people part right? You can have the whole rest of the half hour, the hour to do the worky work stuff. But the first 5 minutes, can we just get 5 minutes to do
What
the
would you have
relationship
them
bit?
do in 5 minutes that builds relationships?
I think those questions are great. I think the idea of saying, I want to get to know my team better, it can start off being something fairly frivolous. I love to ask, for example, what's the first live music event you ever went to? People love talking about what they went to go see. I think for me, it was George Thorogood and the Delaware Destroyers. Let me date myself with that one. But the point is that that's fun, easy, light. Now, all of a sudden, we're in the habit that every team meeting, we're going to have one of these kind of icebreakers. And over time, they could get a little bit more meaningful. What's one aspect of your work that you love and one that you don't? Ooh,
It's
whoa.
interesting, actually. You're kind of calling out these really good tips. And I call this the motivational paycheck, right? So people volunteer, for example, they don't get a paycheck, but they get something out of it. And it's not just for the sake of, doing something for others. And these things are about connection, right? They're about networking. They're about getting to know about things that are not in your day to day. And you're basically saying, build that into the conversations.
100%. And something like saying, what's the natural strength that you have that you're not currently bringing into your work? And how could you change that even a little bit over the next 30 days?
Yeah. So do
Wow.
you know, because we started with the gap, right? The gap is I care about something. You don't know about that, or maybe you don't even care, right? And therefore you're not motivating me from that space. Maybe you're giving me something else. In fact, I just saw a post on LinkedIn today. Somebody was describing a story from their past where they said, I asked for help because I was kind of drowning, and they gave me a promotion, as in, I'll give you more money and a bigger job description so that you'll be okay with doing everything you're doing, right?
Yeah,
And
problem
that's
solved.
not, and they quit, right? That's not what they needed.
Right, exactly right. I had this with a team member. We went through an exercise like this to understand our strengths and what we perceived as each other's strengths. And then you compare the two lists and you say, what's the strength that I have versus a strength that others may not be seeing in me? One of my team members, she said humor was something that she felt was one of her strengths, and nobody had rated her high on humor. And in our follow-on one-on-one coaching, I asked her, I said, that came up. And she goes, no, it really kind of bothered me. But then I realized I'm not demonstrating my humor. I felt some concern about that. But now that the team has seen it and they've encouraged me to demonstrate that more, I'm going to do that. And she did, and she's hilarious, as it turns out. So this was a blockage that she had, and only by going through the exercise did we overcome her perception gap, where she's like, I see myself as lighthearted and humorous, and ways to make emotional deposits in people's account through my humor, and it's not showing up in my work. And then she
Yeah.
realized in that case, she was the problem. Well,
And
if every
she
time,
wasn't bringing herself authentically to work either, right? So she was keeping herself out, which probably affected her own experience.
correct. But now if she had told me that and I wasn't being a good accountability partner to her, and let's say 2 weeks had gone by and she hadn't cracked a single joke or had a light moment in a meeting, I might have said to her, hey, remember that exercise? That's something you said you wanted to do. I see you're still not clear to that. Why don't you why don't you come with a dad joke to every one-on-one? It doesn't even matter. It can be silly. It can be whatever. It can be small. But the point is, we're talking about behavior change. We're talking about behavioral science. We're talking about how do we start to ease into these new ways of understanding. So one, I took an interest in my team well enough that I set up a light exercise for us to go through. It didn't take a long time, but it sure produced a lot of value. Everybody knew that I was interested in learning about their strengths and helping them see one another in a new light. And in this case, we decided to change our behavior, which is to choose one of our strengths that we felt we had that the others weren't necessarily seeing, and to follow through on that so we could feel more authentic, more whole, more complete in our work. And it worked out. It was beautiful.
So how does that then exit the 5-minute opening in the team meeting and become something that shows up in how people actually engage in work?
Yeah, some of it happens naturally because we always have hallway conversations or a Zoom that finishes up early or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden there's just natural interest in one another and understanding that we're more than just our transactional approach to work.
Mm.
And a lot of it takes care of itself. But you can also parlay that and say, maybe during every meeting, it's 5 minutes. Could we think about an hour a month? Could we do a special dedicated session 1 hour a month? That's not a lot of time. Well, what about a half day once a quarter? Or at least every 6 months?
Yeah,
Maybe.
so you start with awareness, you're taking small steps.
Yeah.
And I also want to circle back to this idea that you mentioned where we could actually use AI to coach us, and two, the time we free up with AI should go into some of these things that we didn't do before. Do you have a good example of how someone actually used AI to grow these areas of expertise?
I'm currently doing a lot of work around my own time management with AI. I'll take a picture, like a literal screen grab of my calendar, and I'll load it into AI to help me to analyze patterns over time. It's really good at stuff like that, I find. I also have used it for creating reflection prompts for me. Like, it's really important, I think leaders don't do often enough, is to reflect, to just have some time, take yourself offline, think about the week that was, pretend it's a weekly reflection. And a lot of times, if you sit there with a blank sheet of paper, you're like, what am I supposed to be reflecting on? But instead, using your AI coach to basically say, hey, you know what? I'm trying to work on my assertiveness. That's a leadership trait that I don't naturally have. I'm an introverted person. This is me saying pretend in this case with me. So I'm trying to be more assertive, and just ask me some reflection questions about my week, about the meetings I had, et cetera, and see if you can help me think through some opportunities where I might have either taken advantage of or maybe missed an opportunity to be assertive. And then
Okay,
sit back and
awesome. Awesome. So basically I can describe my team, my people, my
sure.
dilemmas, and then have the chat about what I could potentially be asking or should be
Yeah.
asking that I'm not.
Now, could I do that with a peer or a coworker? Maybe, but most people don't. Why?
Yeah.
Because it feels very vulnerable. And
Yeah.
who cares? I try to talk to my bride about my work. She's like, stop, I'm bored to death already. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. So instead, AI is always there and it'll listen. And right now, it's in a generation, it's going to continue to get better. It's actually plausible. It's better than not doing it, which is great. And I think it'll only increase its capability to allow us to use it as a tool in that way. But again, back to your point, Nirit, how do I free up my time? How do I use my new enhanced self-awareness to climb that ladder beyond just the performance into people, into purpose, so that I can really be this integrated, holistic leader that's going to be the kind of people want to follow? That's what it
Yeah.
takes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really good time to ask you one of the questions I always wrap up with, right? What do you, because we're really good at asking questions and expecting answers. It's part of the pattern we've been evolved to think through. But what's the one question you think we should be asking about the future of work?
I think that the biggest question about the future of work is two-parter. One is, what is my opportunity to shape the future of work? And how do I see that benefiting those around me? If I could, for your listeners and for myself, first and foremost, those are the questions I'd want seared into my brain. What is my opportunity? Because I need accountability to work from the inside out. But what's my opportunity to serve others? That's my intention, working outside in. And I find that that's the most complete and appropriate form of leadership possible. So that's how I would approach that question for the future of work.
Yeah, I think throughout this conversation, you keep taking us back to the accountability and the kind of the awareness. So be conscious about what you're doing and how what you're doing is affecting others around you.
Yes, exactly. That's where it all begins.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt, for joining me today. For more about Matt and the Predictive Index, look up the links in the episode description. Thank you for joining me on the episode of The Future of Less Work. If you found this helpful, share it with someone who's rethinking leadership or maybe should be. And remember, your best people do not work because you tell them to, not because they have to, not because you're measuring them on it. They work because they want to, because by working for you, they're also doing what's important to them in life. Till next time.